Thank you. I just will speak very briefly before introducing my colleagues at the outset. President Trump's been in office just over 30 days, and he has issued a blizzard of executive orders that have had very broad impacts. Some of them seem silly, like trying to rename the Gulf of Mexico. Some of them have been chilling and have impacts in terms of immigration and diversity and equity and inclusion goals, and a shutdown of many federal agencies. But as the weeks have unfolded, it's become clearer and clearer that he intends to have a very broad impact on federal government programs that have an impact on our daily lives, whether it's on air safety, veteran services, protecting us from the avian flu, nuclear safety. And Elon Musk, the wealthiest man on earth and a major contributor to Trump's campaign and a federal contractor, has launched his Department of Government Efficiency, and they have sent small teams of young men into roughly half of the federal government, seized access to vital information, connected to their email systems, laid off tens of thousands, and are causing, in my view, widespread chaos in the federal government. I don't disagree that we need to look at federal spending and find efficiencies and improve service delivery, but this is doing that with a chainsaw, not a scalpel. So what am I doing and what are we doing? I'll just briefly mention at the outset, I've joined dozens of letters with other senators to federal agencies and the president demanding answers about what they're doing and why. We've been opposing the nominees for Trump's cabinet, speaking out at rallies, holding all-night sessions on the Senate floor where we've been putting Republicans on the record and demanding that they vote on some of these issues that have been unfolding, and supporting our Attorney General, who will speak in a moment to give you an update about federal district court and federal court litigation that frankly is the best and most productive route for putting a hold or a stop on some of these illegal and outrageous actions. Let me close by just saying the reality of our current politics is that in the Senate, there's 53 Republicans. And as long as they are willing to vote in lockstep to confirm President Trump's nominees and to move forward on his budget plan, which is what happened last week and is now going to happen maybe not this coming week in the House, there is relatively little we can do in the minority. I think it's worth reflecting on what is the overall goal in this blizzard of activity in the first month. It is to cut hundreds of billions of dollars in federal spending by shutting down whole agencies or cutting swaths of different departments that impact people's lives in order to fund a record tax cut for billionaires and the most profitable companies. In my view, that is not a great purpose, and we should be having a more measured, thoughtful, deliberate path forward on how we manage to live within our means as a nation, how we strike the right balance in terms of protecting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and how we advance our interests abroad and here at home. Let me stop there. I so look forward to your questions and appreciate your joining. As concerned citizens, you're doing one of the most important things you can do, which is to make sure that you're communicating with your federal representatives and making sure you're getting information about what's actually happening. Let me turn now to my dear friend and colleague, Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester.
Thank you, Senator Coons, and thank you so much, Delaware. Good afternoon. It's really important that we be here together. Your congressional delegation, along with our Attorney General Kathy Jennings, we have together met with nonprofits and local government officials, along with our governor, to really deal with the time that's really unprecedented. You know this delegation, you know us as whether, it's as members of Congress, the Senate, or even the General Assembly, we try to be bipartisan and act in a bipartisan way. This moment has really, as the senator said, caused chaos, but also confusion and fear, whether it is from a nonprofit who is concerned about funding that was already legally approved by Congress, whether it is a project, an infrastructure project where the shovel was in the ground, but people are fearful that the money is going to be clawed back and we won't be able to deal with those kinds of commitments that were already made, again, legally and constitutionally, because Congress passed these laws, or whether it is a family that is concerned about whether Medicare will be there or Medicaid will be there for their child with a disability or their aging parent. Um, what we are hearing from thousands of Delawareans is that this is impacting every single person. I shared last week that I was actually on the stage about to speak to a group of federally qualified health center leaders from around the country. And before I could even walk onto the stage, federally qualified health centers in Virginia were being shut down because they did not have the resources. And so, in line with what Senator Coons said, we agree that it is important that we have a well-run, well-functioning government that provides health, safety, really protection for us, everything from the avian flu to dealing with things like the measles outbreak that has just happened in Texas, to making sure that our planes, the flights are safe. There is a serious role. But as the former Secretary of Labor from Delaware and former head of state personnel, I can tell you this is not workforce planning. This is not intentional and really thought out. It is more chaotic and it's just causing confusion, what we're seeing both in the firings, but also in the freezing of dollars. And then the other piece I would probably have to highlight is the fact that this is not, we have a government of checks and balances. And so it is important that all of us do our part in this very moment. And that includes our Republican colleagues who I think are now starting to hear from their constituents across the country as well, and starting to feel the real impact that these freezes are having, that these firings that are happening, and that the attacks on our Constitution are having. I look forward to your questions as well. That's why we wanted to make sure we had this opportunity. And I thank Senator Coons and his team for pulling this together. It has been important to work with my colleagues here to make sure that we stand up for you. And that's really what this is all about, hearing your voices and understanding what impact it's having on you, sharing with you the things that we're doing as a delegation and as our Attorney General. And again, remembering that we are in this together and that we are going to continue to fight for you. And it is now my honor to turn it over to another champion and fighter for Delaware, our Congresswoman Sarah McBride.
Thank you so much, Senator Blunt Rochester and Senator Coons. I appreciate the opportunity for all of us to come together today with our Attorney General and with thousands of Delawareans joining on this WebEx and joining through social media and YouTube for this important conversation. Thank you to each and every one of you for taking time to join us today. And let me begin by thanking you all. This is my first formal town hall as a member of Congress, and I want to start by thanking you all for entrusting me with the responsibility of representing you in Congress. Serving Delaware is the privilege of a lifetime, and whether you voted for me or not, I am here to fight for you. We may not always agree, but I take the privilege and the responsibility of defending Delaware and Delawareans seriously, especially as I enter Congress at a moment of real fear and risk for our country. Since taking office, I've been meeting and visiting with Delawareans from all walks of life, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. And one thing is abundantly clear. People are confused and scared right now due to the actions of the executive branch as we've witnessed disruptions to funding and services that countless Delawareans depend on. This is a crisis, and they are trying to prove that government can't work by making it not work. Over the last several weeks, I've been working with my colleagues in Congress to push back against the measures I believe harm Delaware and Delawareans, to use the legislative levers at our disposal now, and importantly, in the weeks and months ahead, to hold this administration and the majority party in Congress accountable. That means using my vote on the floor. It means using my capacity to introduce legislation. It means, and co-sponsor legislation. It means using the opportunities at hearings to ask critical questions of the administration. It means joining you all in the streets. It means coordinating with state and local government. It means working with our Attorney General, who has been on the front lines in courtrooms across the country with her fellow attorneys general to fight back against these attacks. Recently, I was asked by Democratic leadership in the House to join a rapid response task force to respond in real time to these actions and to get as creative as possible as we can to use the levers at our disposal. And while there are certain levers only available to the majority in Congress, we will continue to use our voices and our votes to fight for our constituents and the programs they rely on. We will continue to coordinate with state government on state level action, and we will continue to use our platforms to help build a mass movement against these dangerous actions. And while I'm building relationships with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in the House already, becoming, for instance, the first freshman House Democrat to introduce legislation this Congress, a bill that was bipartisan, we need sustained public pressure on Republican colleagues to increase the chance of at least 3 in the House, of at least 3 finding the courage to join every Democrat to create a majority in this chamber that is willing to rein in the worst excesses of this administration. And I just want to close on this. Much of this administration's power stems from the perception of their strength, but the tide is turning. Public opinion is shifting rapidly against this administration's dangerous power grabs, draconian cuts, and disingenuous strategy to use diversity efforts as a Trojan horse to gut life-saving programs that working people rely on. We've already seen them revisit and revise actions in response to overwhelming public outrage. I know it doesn't always feel this way, but our voices are already making a difference just a few weeks into this. And the single most powerful thing you can do is to help us bring your stories to Congress to illustrate the harm and the consequences of this administration's actions. In the short run, the courts are providing a stopgap to these attacks. And our fearless Attorney General has been working with her colleagues across the country to fight for our rights, to fight for programs, to fight for our Constitution. And with that, I'd like to turn things over for an update from our Attorney General, Kathy Jennings.
Thank you, Representative McBride. Thank you, Senator Coons, for convening us. And thank you, as always, to Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester for your tireless work. You know, together we are a formidable team, and in the state of Delaware, we get things done because we do work together. Unfortunately, we have a president who believes he is king. And while this moment is unprecedented in my lifetime, it was also exactly what the founders were preparing for when they wrote our Constitution. In addition to Congress, and I am so grateful for our congressional delegation and their expertise and fortitude, the founders gave us strong and independent courts. That's where I and other state attorneys general come in. We have brought this administration to court time and time again. We did it dozens of times in President Trump's first term, and we are so far batting 1,000 against him in this term. When he tried to freeze federal funds for schools, healthcare, housing, and public safety, we took him to court and we won. When he tried to give Elon Musk and his minions the keys to the Treasury, we took him to court and we won. When he tried to revoke birthright citizenship in clear violation of the 14th Amendment of our United States Constitution, yes, we took him to court and we won. The law is on our side and we are getting results. We can't take anything for granted with this administration, but I and my fellow attorneys general are talking each and every day about how to coordinate the legal defense of Americans and their rights. We're not getting tired of winning, and we're not standing down. What the president and his lackeys are doing is not only unprecedented, but it is destabilizing. And I know that so many of you who have participated on this webinar with us today are looking for answers. And I really believe that you are the answer. While we will continue to work really hard and fight for you each and every day and continue to win in the court of law, we are also winning in the court of public opinion. And it is we, the people, who will take us forward. And this movement is growing. It is getting stronger each day that some new terrible thing happens. And I know that together we can make a difference and we can stop this. So I am very, very grateful for your participation today and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. We're now going to move to questions that have been pulled from the chat. So there are hundreds of questions coursing by in the chat, but I'm going to work with my colleagues here to try and answer as many as we can in the time we've got. Judy from Middletown asked, what are you doing to stop Elon Musk from decimating the government and accessing my private information, such as my social security number, bank account information, etc.? First, this was the vote that I got on the floor of the Senate Thursday night. Senator Blunt Rochester and I were part of the group that kept us in session all night long. And I pushed for an amendment vote on this. Every single Democrat voted for an amendment that would block Elon Musk from accessing your personal information, like your social security number, like your tax records. And every single Republican voted for continuing to give him and Doge access. Our Attorney General has joined more than 20 other states in filing a federal court action seeking an injunction against Doge inappropriately using personally identifiable information. That's 2 actions that I've taken. But frankly, this is the #1 issue that Delawareans have called me about, expressing concern and alarm. And as I said on 60 Minutes last Sunday, the thing that makes most of us afraid about this is that if Doge, an unelected, unofficial group of tech bros, has access to the master files that contain our personal information, there's no telling what they can and might do with that information and how it might be used or weaponized against us. So I share your sense of alarm. This is something I've spoken out against at protests on the floor of the Senate, and I support our Attorney General's litigation actions to try and bring an end to it. Kathy, did you want to say anything else about that first question?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. We have right now a court-issued order that prohibits Elon Musk and the people who enter the United States Treasury and elsewhere from not only using any of the information they got, but they must destroy the information that they've gotten. So unless and until that changes, and I have every belief that courts will continue to uphold this, your private information cannot be used by Musk and his team. They have to maintain the privacy of it. They can't keep going into government buildings and getting more private information, and they have to abide by the law. If they do not, we will be there to enforce that law.
Second question we've got is from Melinda from Wilmington. I'm going to ask Senator Blunt Rochester to answer this. What are Democrats doing to stop the overreach of the current administration's power grab and blatant disrespect for the Constitution?
Thank you, Senator. You know, there's a multi-pronged approach that we're taking in this moment. It starts with litigation and policy. That's some of what Senator Coons was talking about in terms of the letters that we have written to different agencies. This is just some of the ones that we've actually participated in, where we are calling to the carpet the administration and those particular agencies that are doing this power grab. That's #1. So there's legislative side that includes the letters that we do, that includes the amendment that Senator Coons put on the floor the other day. I put an amendment on the floor. I was able to speak, I think it was 4:18 in the morning. where we are like slowing down this process. So that gives the courts time to do what they need to do. So the first step is the legislative side. We're doing all we can, pulling every lever that we can there. The second is litigation as part of this two-pronged strategy. So for example, when you're sending your stories into our offices, this is part of the case that we're making. When we are sending these letters, some people say, well, what good is that? Those letters put these agencies on record for what they're doing, as well as this administration. So there's legislation, litigation, then there's oversight. I actually participated in a shadow hearing. We are, again, putting things on the record, and we're pushing the administration. That oversight is a lot also of what Senator Coons does as an appropriator. Then the other piece is communication and mobilization. That's part of what we're doing here today. We want to make sure that we really, right now, we need to flood the zone. And that means each and every one of you as well, sharing your information, spreading the word about what's happening. There are some people who still don't even know what Doge is. So it's important for us to make sure that people's voices are lifted. Because what we saw, even with the Affordable Care Act, over the 70 times that our Republican colleagues tried to replace and repeal and dismantle, we were able to keep the Affordable Care Act because of the people, because of the power of the people, and because of our efforts. And then the last piece, as I mentioned, is mobilization, and that's where you come into play as well. We're doing it a multi-pronged strategy, but the reality is we can't do it all on our own. And I loved a quote from Senator Cory Booker, who said, he talked about the power of the people being stronger than the people in power. We need you in this very present moment to keep sharing your stories, keep making sure that we know what's going on, and keep showing up where you can, and finding out the information that's going to keep your family safe, whole, and well. Those are just some of the things that we're doing.
Thanks. Our third question is from Rosalind, might be Rosalind, forgive me, from Wilmington. What will you do to protect specifically Medicaid and Medicare from being cut and strengthen Social Security so it'll be there for us, our grandchildren, and children? And Sarah, if you'd start us with an answer to that, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, Senator Coons, and thank you for the question. Protecting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid is our top priority as a congressional delegation. And I think that the attacks we're seeing on these critical benefits, these legacy benefits that working people and retirees have relied on for generations, falls into really two categories right now. The first, and they're interconnected, the first is the effort by DOJ to access private data within these various agencies that manage and administer these programs. This is a gross invasion of privacy, and the Attorney General is in court pushing back against the illegal attempts by the Doge Bros to access this data. Now, they're accessing this data partly in order to get it for themselves in the private sphere, but also in an attempt to lay the foundation for a feigned concern about waste in these programs, in an attempt to then use that feigned concern about waste as an excuse to gut these programs that people rely on. Recently, I joined many of you in Rodney Square on behalf of the Congressional delegation. The senators were in Washington on the floor of the Senate at the time to protest against the DOJ efforts to invade privacy and access private data in all of these systems. We need to continue. We need to continue to push back on the streets and in the court of public opinion on these attempts to invade our privacy. But then let's get to the actual tangible risk that comes to the sustainability of those programs with government funding. Because what we are about to see is a wholesale attempt to gut these programs through the Republican budget. Now, sometimes you are going to hear that they're not going to touch these programs. We know that that's not true. The Republican budget already calls for nearly $1 trillion over the next several years in cuts to Medicaid. They have said that they aren't going to touch Social Security and Medicare, but they're already putting forward those excuses that I mentioned earlier around trying to address waste. We know that they said that they wouldn't be implementing Project 2025, but now they are. Donald Trump said he wouldn't touch Medicaid. Now they are. We know they're not telling the truth about the protection of these life-saving programs. I think everyone here knows what Medicare and Social Security is. Just to clarify, Medicaid is a program administered by the state, but largely funded through the federal government. It's health coverage for roughly 1 in 4 Delawareans. That includes Delawareans with disabilities, it includes low-income Delawareans, and it includes more than half of children in Delaware. This program provides health coverage for some of the most vulnerable neighbors in our state. And it is right at the heart of the budget cuts that Republicans are putting forward, trillions of dollars in cuts in order to pass trillions of dollars more in tax cuts for the wealthy. We are obviously united in opposition to these cuts. I will be voting against the budget resolution on the House floor this week. But we also know that the way to defeat these cuts and protect these programs is to convince our Republican colleagues to stand with us. And while I know that we haven't always seen, in fact, we almost never seen courage from our Republican colleagues in standing up to Donald Trump yet, we know in circumstances around Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, if they feel enough public pressure, they may turn against this budget. And that's one of the strategies we are employing right now to make sure people understand what is at risk with this budget, to raise the alarm about the cuts to Medicaid that would decimate that program. And in that vein, my office and I think my colleagues in the Senate, their offices are collecting stories of Delawareans who have seen their lives either saved or enhanced because of health coverage under Medicaid. We need to lay out the case for why this program is so important for people who don't understand what it is, and make sure that we are sounding the alarm in 435 congressional districts about the dangerous and in some cases deadly cuts that the Republican budget is putting forward. I am cautiously optimistic that we are starting to see some cracks in the Republican unity on this budget as their constituents are speaking out, because Democrats have been sounding the alarm nationally about the cuts to Medicaid that we are seeing.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Sarah. The next question I've got is from Haley. Can you speak to the reconciliation bill? What's the potential impact for those with disabilities who rely on Medicare or Medicaid? And just to be clear, reconciliation is a once-a-year process that allows for a bill to come through the Senate with only 51 votes. So it gets around the legislative filibuster. It was the first step of that kept Senator Blunt Rochester and me up all night on Thursday, putting on the floor amendment after amendment, slowing it down as much as we could, as far as the law would allow us. That budget, which is now going to be taken up, the reconciliation bill is likely going to be taken up in the House this week. It goes to the relevant committees. They come back, and then they will put back on the floor in a couple of weeks the final bill that the House will take up, and then if it passes, the Senate will take up, and it goes to the president. This is how we passed the Affordable Care Act with only 51 senators supporting. This was how Trump passed his massive tax cut in 2017 with no Democrats supporting. It is an exceptional and an unusual measure. And what Congresswoman McBride was just speaking to is exactly this threat, that in the House, they've been clear they intend to cut billions and billions of dollars in the benefits of Medicare and Medicaid in order to pay for the tax cut that will also be a part of that bill. This has no support among Democrats. No Democrat in the House or Senate supports cutting these critical health programs in order to fund further tax cuts. And that's going to be the majority of the action in Congress in the coming weeks. We also have a looming government shutdown on March 14th, and a vigorous debate in my caucus about whether we should allow the government to shut down, because bluntly, President Trump is already shutting down whole agencies and departments. You may not have heard of CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but it's done a lot for consumers in recent years in reducing the fees and charges that banks can charge you. You may not have heard of USAID, but it's what helps keep us safe from natural disasters, from pandemics, from problems that afflict millions of people around the world. There are many other federal agencies that Trump is illegally trying to shut down or actually shutting down. That's where the Attorney General comes in, is in blocking that. I've also seen lots of questions about what are you doing to try and work across the aisle and to appear on conservative media. I do interviews with Fox almost every week. I was on News Nation this past week. I believe it's important for these same messages about what's the impact of these cuts to get out to every American, not just those who might vote with or believe the same things that I as a Democrat do. And I am working diligently with a group of Republicans in the Senate who oppose the foreign aid cuts and who say privately they're willing to stand up on Ukraine. Many of you have posted in the chat that even today in the United Nations, President Trump has directed his State Department to do something I profoundly disagree with, which is to misrepresent who started the war in Ukraine. Russian aggression did, and who do Western countries stand with, and it's with the freedom fighters of Ukraine. I won't take much longer on that subject, but please know that working across the aisle and trying to get some of my Republican colleagues to block nominees and to vote against this reconciliation bill is the most important work that I'm doing in the Senate.
Senator, could I just add to that, Senator?
Please.
The original question about the impact on people with disabilities, why it is so important for us to have a town hall like this, why your role of spreading the word about these things is because so much is on the chopping block. And I want us to not forget, again, what is it for? Why are we trying to find all of this money? Why are we firing all these people, even indiscriminately firing people who are supposed to be in charge of nuclear safety or flight safety? It is for a tax cut for not everybody, not most of us, but for a small number of very, very rich people. And it's almost been termed reverse Robin Hood. And I think it's important to remember that. And then number two, Senator Coons brought up the potential of a shutdown. Right now, Republicans hold the House, they hold the Senate, and they hold the White House. And it is incumbent upon them, just like we made sure that we did not default, we made sure that we passed the budget, that they work to make sure that doesn't happen, that we don't have a shutdown. As Senator Coons said, they're ultimately shutting down agency by agency, but the impact would be very huge for us. And then I guess the last thing I would share on the communication piece, I mentioned communication. Senator Coons has done a great job of going on different places like Fox News and others. But one of the challenges that we face is that there is the currency right now is attention and grabbing people's attention. And when you can have Elon Musk tweet 1,800 times in one day, we also are getting into places that we traditionally maybe have not been. Podcasts, heavier on social media. And again, that's where we need all of you. As you get the information, share it. As we get the resources that will help your neighbor or help your business or help your nonprofit, share it. That's what this is for as well, is we're here to serve you. I'll turn it back over to you, Senator.
If I just may add to the comment that the Congresswoman just made with regard to the potential government shutdown in mid-March. To her point, Republicans control both chambers of Congress and the White House. They have full control of the federal government. It is their responsibility to keep this government open. And if they are not able to do the basic functions of their job as the party in control, then we know who is ultimately responsible for this shutdown. Similarly, if they come to us because they are unable to do their job, how are we supposed to trust them? How are we supposed to trust that they will keep their word to promises they make in negotiations in Congress when they are unilaterally and illegally violating congressionally mandated requirements to spend congressionally appropriated money on life-saving programs across the country? There is a trust issue there is a breach of trust that has occurred between the executive branch, the legislative branch, between the executive branch and the American people, between the executive branch and state governments, between the executive branch and hospitals and nonprofits and senior centers in Delaware and across the country. They have broken the trust, and it is going to be hard for any of us to be able to trust that they will faithfully implement whatever is passed by Congress in mid-March.
Could I add one very important
Please
point
do.
to the great comments of the congressional delegation? We have 3 branches of government. And you can tell that our delegation is fighting like heck to make sure that people who work alongside them, who are Republicans, are going to speak up and do the right thing. Our founders developed a 3rd branch of government, which is the courts. I have tremendous respect for the rule of law. And that's why we've taken to the courts as attorneys general all together in Delaware to fight these illegal moves by the Trump administration. And we are winning. I believe there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I believe that judges overall respect the rule of law. And I know a lot of these cases are going right up to the Supreme Court in the not too distant future, birthright citizenship likely being the first. But I just believe that our courts understand their role and they care about their legacy as the 3rd branch of government. And so let's continue to rely on them. And in continuing to rely on them, we need to hear from you when you believe that these court orders have been violated, because we can use that as a tool to go back to the court and get more forceful orders that we may need to get, including on up to contempt.
Our next question is from Donald for Lisa, for Senator Blunt Rochester. Science and engineering research is incredibly important to Delawareans, to our universities. What are you doing to protect our universities and companies from the current funding freeze on federal research?
Thank you so much, Donald, for that question. As a matter of fact, when this first went into effect, I was on the phone with different university presidents from Delaware to ask what the impact was and to talk about what we can do. As Senator Coons mentioned, us staying up all night for what they call votorama, that process where we put our amendments. My amendment was actually focused on our scientists and making sure that we know how important this is for Delaware. And so for me, we didn't even get, we did a voice vote for my amendment because I think there was some concern about being on the record on making sure that we're standing up for those who are in our sciences, our healthcare workforce, and that's part of what we were focused on. The bottom line for me is we're here to protect Delaware. So even when I was doing these questioning of the Trump nominees, I specifically talked about NIMBLE at University of Delaware. I specifically talked about programs at Delaware State University, and I talked about some of our companies, our biotech companies, because this is important. So as a delegation, we're continuing to ask the questions of the nominees and make sure that they know what Delaware's interests are, but we're also asking them to stay accountable for the dollars we already got. That was one of the reasons why I came to the decision to stop voting in support of these nominees. I had the secretary to be of one of the agencies come before me and say, yes, we will protect those dollars that we got in the Inflation Reduction Act that would, continue to lower costs and invest in our infrastructure and the bipartisan infrastructure law. And literally the next day, President Trump put out an executive order rescinding the money. I reached back out to that cabinet secretary. He said, I'm trying to work it out. Even when they don't want to break the law or do something that's not right, it is not happening. And so, as Senator Coons mentioned, we both have said we will not support these nominees until this administration does the right thing. So we will continue to work with our scientists. I am on the Commerce Committee. I am also on the Health Committee as well. And so we will continue to work with folks in our areas. But I think the challenge right now is making sure that we keep on this multi-pronged strategy, because it's going to take us coming from all different perspectives. I appreciate our Attorney General's, I would say, optimism about all of this, and I think we're going to need that as we move forward.
We did file, thank you, Senator. I'm not always the most optimistic among us, but I will say this: we filed an action against the Trump administration when they cut healthcare grants to universities through the National Institute of Health. And we now have an order that curtails that says you can't cut those grants. They should be flowing at this point in time to universities. If they are not, we need to hear from you.
Yeah, and that was actually after I talked to those presidents, I connected them to our Attorney General, because I knew she was doing that type of work. But also connected to all of this, let's not forget, what we haven't seen is the price of eggs go down. What we haven't seen is the impact on cost. It's one of the reasons why, even in my first few weeks, I continue to work on strengthening our supply chains, because we know that has been a challenge, and got bipartisan legislation out of committee with Senators Cantwell and Blackburn. We want to work together, because that's why we were sent here. We want to work across the aisle. But this current situation where money is being taken back, and ultimately, and I don't know if Kathy, if the Attorney General wants to talk at all about the Supreme Court, and because many of these cases may make their way to the Supreme Court. And I see Senator Coons also. I don't know what that might mean. But
Look, a lot of folks in the chat are asking questions about impeachment, arrest, martial law, and the Supreme Court. And I'll briefly say, before we ask our Attorney General to speak to that, at the end of the day, our checks and balances require each of the branches to jealously guard their prerogative. The majority of Republicans in the Senate have been handing over power, and they need to be held accountable for it. And I am working to try and persuade those of them that are alarmed by what's happening to change their direction in their vote. In the courts, so far, the Attorney General has been very successful in district court litigation, but those are rapidly moving up to circuit courts, and they will make it to the Supreme Court. As for impeachment, an impeachment is exactly like a trial, but it requires a majority of the members of the House to vote articles of impeachment, and then a majority of the Senate, a supermajority of the Senate, to convict. When Trump was impeached before, there were Democratic majorities in the House and Senate. I do not expect impeachment to succeed where a Republican majority is going along with his agenda. Madam Attorney General, you want to speak to the Supreme Court concerns folks have raised?
Thank you, Senator, and I do. Many of the current Supreme Court justices were appointed by President Trump in his first term. And I can tell you that they have issued a couple of very surprising decisions that we all know about when they overturned Roe v. Wade on decades and decades of reproductive freedom for women in our country. When they issued the Berlin decision on guns that we believe was likely wrongly decided, but nevertheless, they have also been very careful when asked to go too far to realize that they need to be a stopgap for all of us. And each one of the justices is going to face what is your legacy, Your Honor? Are you going to go down in history as upholding the rule of law, in validating separation of powers that are the foundation of our country, and your independence from the executive branch? I believe that they will do the right thing, but we're going to fight like heck to make sure they do.
I've got a question for Senator Blunt Rochester. Joanne and Kim, both from Lewis, asked, and I think this is what many people are asking, what can I do and what do you suggest we can do as individuals to help save our democratic republic?
Thank you both, Joanne and Kim. And thank you, Senator Coons. I know you all know I have to jump off to interview a prospective Trump nominee. And so I want to start off by saying, as challenging as this time is, Delaware, we have been through tough times together. And I think making sure that we look at this as a community. We had an opportunity to speak with the governor about making sure that people know what resources are available to them, whether it is mental health resources, whether it is budgeting resources. People will be needing some assistance, and we need to work together as a community. I think the second thing is continue to tell your stories. It is so important for our Attorney General, for us as the delegation, to be able to build that record and to be able to also spread the word about the impacts that it is having. As you already heard from our Congresswoman and our Senator, all three of us have seen the impact that it's already having on our Republican colleagues who are stepping up and saying, well, maybe you shouldn't be so callous with these firings, and maybe you should be more deliberate with what you're doing. They're starting to speak up, but they need to hear it, and we need to hear your stories so that we can demonstrate the real impact and the real harms that we are seeing. And then in this moment, I think there's a lot of fear and confusion. And so to the extent that you can take care of yourself and support each other, that is going to be needed probably more than anything else during this time. I am fortunate and blessed that I am part of a team, a dynamic Delaware delegation. And so I hope that you know our offices stand ready to be there for you and with you. And we will continue to serve Delaware and try to make sure that we deliver for Delaware. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over. I know my colleagues also have great suggestions, but again, stay strong, tell your stories, be mobilized, and be in community. Thank you, guys. I've got to jump.
Thank you. A number of folks on the chat have been pressing for us to speak to the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is a Chip Roy bill in the House, and I'll ask Sarah McBride to speak to it. Just to be clear about a simple point, every single state already has laws, and the federal government has laws that prohibit folks who are non-citizens from voting in elections. Non-citizens cannot legally vote in elections. The SAVE Act is another attempt at purging voter rolls and requiring far more documentation to be able to vote than is currently required. And lots of folks have contacted me in my office, in particular married women who have changed their name from what is on their birth certificate, saying that this bill goes too far. It is a piece of political theater, claiming that there are millions of people voting illegally who are not, and it would make it harder for legitimate U.S. citizens to vote. But it's in the House, not the Senate. Congresswoman, I thought you might want to speak to it.
Yes, thank you, Senator. As the Senator mentioned, the SAVE Act is legislation that is built off of the false and disingenuous claims of voter fraud. And it would place burdensome barriers in place for people to access the franchise, to access their ballot box, by requiring them to show proof of citizenship. They already can't vote if they are not citizens, but showing documentation that for many people they do not have readily available. And for many, There is a disconnect between what the documents might say and what their current legal name is, including 69 million women across the country who do not have a birth certificate that reflects their present legal name. I believe every Democrat will be voting against this legislation when it comes to the floor of the House. Should it pass, I am optimistic that with fighters like Senator Coons in the Senate, they will do all they can to stop it. But again, this is legislation that is built on an outright lie, that voter fraud is rampant in this country. It is not. That voter ID laws and laws that require voters to present documentation are anything but an effort to make it harder for people to vote. And we are united in this delegation against any effort that would make it harder for people to vote. I do want to touch on the comment earlier too about what people can do. As I mentioned, I joined many of you in Rodney Square last week for a protest against the DOJ efforts, as Senator Coons and Senator Blunt Rochester were on the floor fighting those efforts in Washington at the same time. We will continue to join you. We need you in the streets. We need you protesting, and we need you as loud as possible. I know it can feel like you're screaming into the void. I know it can feel like things are overwhelming. But as I said at the start, the tide is turning. We are only, I know this is frightening, but also heartening, we are only a month in, and the numbers are already starting to drop. And we do still live in a democracy. Our colleagues in Washington are still afraid of losing their seats should public opinion turn against them, particularly in seats where the main race is a general election. And so the strategy is beginning to show seeds of hope, show seeds of it working. But we have to continue. We have to continue to double down. And we also, to be completely transparent, have to be careful about what we say. There are limitations on what we can say on an official town hall about what you can do with other members of Congress. And so one thing I will say, though, to reiterate a point, and perhaps you can read into this. All of us have relationships with people, not just in Delaware. And it's important for all of us to remain in communication with our friends and our family members, coworkers, former classmates, regardless of where they live, regardless of whether they live in Delaware. And so it's important, as you are reaching out to us, as you are protesting in Delaware, it is important for all of us to continue to be in conversation with all of our friends and family members. Because we only need a handful of courageous Republicans. And when you have a 3-seat majority in the House, that means that there are more than 3. The balance of power is held by Republicans in swing districts.
To be clear, you just got to look at a map, and there are places nearby where there are Republican members of the House and Senate. To just amplify what the Congresswoman just said, this is on official Senate time using official Senate resources. I would love to be urging some of the folks today to contribute to or volunteer for or get engaged in particular campaigns or efforts. I will do that through the Democratic Party at a Democratic Party event. We are working to schedule a similar thing for those who are interested in more partisan political activity, but that's not appropriate on this platform. This is about providing you with information, asking for your questions and trying to answer them generally about how it's hurting us, our state, and our country, to have all these different executive orders rolled out, and what we are doing to try and slow down and oppose the actions that are most alarming. I've never had more calls in a week than I had from Delawareans expressing alarm that DOJ and Elon Musk had gotten access to their personal information. The folks calling in about that were not just Democrats or Republicans or independents. They were Delawareans of all backgrounds. And so this is less of an appropriate place to talk about organizing protest rallies, contributing to candidates, or getting engaged in campaigns. But I very much welcome those who want to speak up, who want to get engaged, and want to take action. Look, at the end of the day, at a moment when so many of the guardrails of our democracy seem to be tested to their very limits, whether it's the courts or the Congress, citizen action is what's going to turn this around. When Trump was president before, the only time he took an abrupt change in direction that I remember was when he started separating kids from their parents as a tool, using cruelty against children, putting kids in cages and separating them from their parents to deter migration. That suddenly electrified people around the country to say, we are not a cruel nation, and we don't use cruelty against children as a means of immigration policy. And he made an abrupt change in direction. But this time, many of the things they're doing are cruel, and intentionally so. And I am concerned, even alarmed, about what new immigration enforcement actions may mean, what actions against people, in particular children with disabilities, may mean in terms of cutting off services and support, and what the reduction of support to our veterans and the Veterans Administration means. President Trump ran on making America affordable again and figuring out how to reduce the price of eggs and groceries. And in the last month, I've seen him focus on everything but those core issues. The next question I've just been handed by Joanna from Wilmington is, what is the Democrats' plan to push back against Trump's tariffs and keep costs more affordable? Eggs are too expensive. Yes, eggs are too damn expensive. And part of that is because of avian influenza. And as I think I mentioned at the outset, Trump has issued orders to the USDA that led to people being fired, including some of the very people responsible for testing and monitoring public health with regards to eggs and egg layers and avian influenza. Some of them are now being hired back. But it's a reminder that there are these mass cuts to the federal workforce that are impacting things that actually matter to individuals, like the price of eggs and protecting public health. I've introduced a bill with Tim Kaine that would claw back the president's ability to just impose tariffs even on our allies. Unfortunately, Congress passed a bill decades ago that gives the president the power to unilaterally impose tariffs. It was assumed when that law was passed that no president would impose tariffs outside of conflict on a close and trusted ally like Canada, but he has repeatedly threatened to impose devastating tariffs on Canada. I have facilitated meetings with ministers of the Canadian government, with their ambassador, with their prime minister, with folks in the new administration. And at the last moment, when he saw the stock market plunging, Trump stepped back from imposing terrible tariffs on Canadian products. The Canadians have also made it really clear that they intend to impose tariffs on our exports. And Canada is one of our top 2 trading partners. This would be terrible for the American economy and make our prices go up. So bluntly, I think the only thing that moves Trump is when the economy and the stock market go down and when public concern and alarm about cruelty go up. Sarah, Congresswoman, did you want to add anything to that answer?
No, I think Senator Coons, you hit the nail on the head that this administration came in saying they were going to lower the cost of eggs and other consumer goods. But the reality is that these efforts to gut and cut the federal government have stopped our ability in the international space to monitor and contain avian influenza in 49 countries. You mentioned the USDA workers that have been fired. Some have been rehired, but of course they don't have the emails for everyone. So it's been hard for them to rehire everyone that they've fired. Once again, showing that this chaotic and incompetent approach to cutting government waste is really not about cutting government waste. It's about grinding government to a halt. And I know some folks are saying, well, what does all of this matter since we're in a crisis around the Constitution? People have to understand that this is all part of a strategy by the current administration. They are seeking to create chaos and confusion. They are seeking to foment culture wars, all in an effort to distract from what they are doing to line the pockets of wealthy donors at the expense of working people. Every single time you see this chaos and confusion, every single time you hear them foment culture wars, look what they're doing with their right hand, because I guarantee you they are working to line the pockets of the wealthy and their donors They are working to fleece seniors by privatizing Social Security and Medicare. They're working to undermine protections for unions. And so we have to highlight the real and tangible consequences that these actions are having on people. Because at the end of the day, all of us sounding the alarm just around the legal or constitutional crisis that either is happening or may happen is not enough for us to secure the majoritarian coalition necessary to effectively push back on these attacks and guarantee that there are elected officials now and in the future who want to protect our Constitution, who want to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and who want to build on our nation's progress. And so it's important for us to always bring home what these issues are in the everyday lives of Delawareans. I do want to just, Senator Coons, if I can take a moment just to say this more broadly, because I think I see a lot of the comments in the chat have sort of taken on a note of understandable hopelessness. And one thing I want to say to everyone is I understand how frightening it feels, how out of control everything can seem when you turn on the news or open social media. And it feels different than 15 or 20 years ago when it felt like if we simply worked for it and fought for it, change would come, progress would occur. Right now, it doesn't feel like that. We can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. It doesn't always feel like if we do all the things that we know we need to do, that it will work, that change will come, that progress will occur. But one thing I just want to say is that sense of inevitability, that change will come with hard work. That is the exception in our country's history. Every single previous generation of Americans has been called to conquer seemingly impossible odds. They had every reason to believe that change would not come. They could not see the light at the end of the tunnel. Enslaved people in the 1850s had no reason to believe that an Emancipation Proclamation was on the horizon. Unemployed workers during the early days of the Great Depression had never heard of a New Deal. But they persevered, they summoned their hope, they found the light, and they changed the world. And I truly believe that if we continue to fight, if we continue to raise our voices, if we continue to mobilize, if we continue to use the levers at our disposal in Congress and in the courts, we can guarantee that this moment is what an advocate in Florida that I know once called a slingshot moment, where yes, we are pulled backward, but ultimately the tension and pressure of being pulled backward propels us to destinations that we've not yet been. I believe that can be this moment too.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We're going to try and get 2 or 3 more questions in before we wrap. A topic that's been brought up a number of times is immigration. A question from Hillary, from Laurel, and I'll ask the Attorney General to also speak to this. What's being done regarding mass deportations of immigrants, and how might that affect Delaware? And I'll tell you that Governor Matt Meyer, who is not on this call today, but I know is interested in engaging with constituents about these issues, is regularly coordinating with the Attorney General, with the Congressional Delegation, to make sure that we understand what ICE is and is not doing in Delaware, and to try and protect children in schools, patients in hospitals, worshipers in places of worship from any inappropriate or intrusive ICE actions. Attorney General, did you want to speak to that at all?
Sure, Senator, thank you. I know immigration is top of mind, and it is frightening for people in Delaware who have families, who have generations of families in our country and in our state. And we need to make sure that they know their rights and they know in actuality what is happening right now in Delaware. The immigration arrests that have occurred in Delaware to date have been largely people who have been accused of, convicted of qualifying crimes that make them eligible for deportation. So these are people who, for the most part, have committed violent crimes and other qualifying crimes. Law enforcement, our local law enforcement, will at times assist in those arrests because they also involve state charges. And local law enforcement is obligated to keep our public safe. What has not happened to date is mass deportations, mass roundups of individuals. But I'm not really here to just give good news. I think that is going to be something that happens in the future. President Trump is under a lot of pressure right now because he promised all of these mass deportations and the numbers aren't adding up. He isn't meeting his numbers, so to speak. In not meeting his numbers, he is feeling like he needs to up the ante. So could there be mass roundups in our state? Yes, they have not happened yet. And the state police and other law enforcement agencies assure us that they have not been requested to do that. But I do believe there will be pressure, and that pressure will come right to Delaware as it is to every other state. We need to be ready. Delaware law enforcement has an option to sign an agreement with ICE officials to work on those larger mass roundups and deportations. To date, there is no law enforcement agency that has signed such an agreement in Delaware. It will be up to them. But I can tell you this, we're going to fight like heck to make sure that people in our state know their rights. And most especially that the children born in our state to undocumented immigrants have the right to citizenship in our country. And we're fighting for that right now. We're batting 1,000 on that. It will go up to the Supreme Court of the United States. But I believe that our 14th Amendment and most constitutional scholars, including the judges who have heard these cases, absolutely believe that the 14th Amendment protects them. What we don't want is for our children to be put in peril. And for our educational institutions, our churches, our places of worship, our employment areas where people work each and every day to make a living for their families are at risk. We will continue to fight that battle. We will continue to try to the extent we can under the law, protect them. Immigration enforcement is largely a federal law enforcement initiative. And so it will be up to ICE, it will be up to the president, and it will be up to everybody in between to make those decisions. But Delaware can stand up and be proud of the fact that we protect everyone in our state, and we will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Attorney General. Thank you, Congresswoman. We've had more than 2,500 people at different points in this, and it's been live streamed on YouTube. It's been recorded and will be available. We will also work as a delegation to do another one of these soon. I've seen in the comments in the chat how many people continue to have questions and concerns, are grateful to have had a chance to hear from us about what we are doing in Washington each and every day that we are there to stand up to challenge and to slow the progress of the Trump administration's DOGE efforts to slash federal services and support, and to continue to speak up for the most vulnerable in our country, to ensure that disabled children, that veterans and retirees, that those who've served our nation at home and abroad continue to get the support that they need and they deserve. Please know that while this is an alarming and a concerning time, when it's hard to have confidence in our system, that your engagement as citizens is the most important first step. You're taking the time to engage with us and to speak out and speak up publicly, whether at protests, by calling or emailing our offices, or reaching out to others, in particular, those who are supporting the president's action and agenda. I too take real courage from the fact that if you look back at the history of our nation, there have been some very difficult chapters. Congressman John Lewis was a personal friend, someone I traveled with many times, both to his home state and throughout the United States, and on a memorable trip to South Africa. And getting to know John and getting to appreciate the unbelievably awful circumstances in Troy, Alabama, where he was born and where he grew up, the fact that he had any hope for the future of our nation, that he was willing to stand up to and endure beatings and abuse, arrests and disrespect, and that ultimately, through our legal system, through public mobilization, through protests and through the heart of the American people, ultimately the laws that existed here in this state and around our country were changed, segregation ended, and justice and inclusion and progress happened. We may be at a similar moment where honestly, we're seeing an executive try and concentrate all power in his hands. And it requires you to not be overwhelmed, not be shut down, not be silenced, but to speak up, engage, be optimistic and confident that together we can bring our nation forward out of this and remain a great democracy. I look forward to hearing from many of you, seeing you here in Delaware, and to continuing to represent you in the United States Senate. Thanks to everybody who participated today.